Hello, and welcome to the 9th Ghostlight Tour of the Smith Opera House in Geneva, New York. Since you can't come to the Smith right now for our history tours, we'll bring the history to you. I'm Chris Woodworth, and I'll be your tour guide. I want to take a moment to thank Taylor Chapman, who contributed a portion of the research for this week's episode. So, without further ado, here's Episode 9, Suffrage at the Smith. On November 6, 1897, the front page of the Geneva Daily Times read, "The closing hours of the State Convention of Woman Suffragists, which has been in session in Geneva for the past 3 days, came last night when the largest and most enthusiastic audience was in attendance at the Opera House. Judging from the entertaining qualities of the speakers and from the many range of topics presented, as well as from the oratory displayed, the ladies reserved the best for the last, and accordingly the convention went out in a blaze of glory." The final speaker at this convention was none other than Reverend Anna Howard Shaw, doctor, minister, and later president of the National American Woman Suffrage Association. That weekend in November 1897 marked one of many gatherings at the Smith Opera House for the cause of women's suffrage. It also illuminated some of the ways in which the early push for the vote focused on the lives of white women, often diminishing the contributions of women of color. The Finger Lakes region boasts a rich and vibrant suffrage history. The 1848 Women's Rights Convention held in Seneca Falls kicked off a multi-decade quest for obtaining the vote for women in the U.S. What may come as a surprise to readers not familiar with suffrage history is that Geneva, New York, and the Smith Opera House played a pivotal role in the U.S. suffrage campaign. Geneva became a hub for suffrage activity thanks largely to the political activism and radical hospitality of Elizabeth Smith Miller and her daughter Anne Fitzhugh Miller. Daughter of abolitionist Gerrit Smith and first cousin to Elizabeth Cady Stanton, it was no wonder that Elizabeth Smith Miller eventually found her way to political activism. According to Norman K. Dan in his book, Ballots, Bloomers, and Marmalade, The Life of Elizabeth Smith Miller, she preferred to work in the wings of the suffrage campaign rather than take center stage with the oratorical prowess that her cousin Elizabeth Cady Stanton was known for. Yet Smith Miller was pivotal in her quieter role. Elizabeth Smith Miller and her daughter Anne documented their engagement in suffrage activism in a series of scrapbooks, which are now housed at the Library of Congress and fully digitized. These scrapbooks are not only a valuable resource for illustrating suffrage activism at the turn of the century, they reveal the poignant role played by Geneva and the Smith in this national campaign. Elizabeth Smith Miller and her family moved to Geneva in 1869, to their home on Route 14 known as Lockland, currently the home of the Lockland School. Here, Smith Miller and her daughter hosted guests and gatherings, creating space for political and philosophical discussions. This was also extended to a camp across the lake known as Fossenview. It was at the Fossenview site that Harriet May Mills, part of the leadership of the New York State Women's Suffrage Association, visited Smith Miller and her daughter and urged them to host the annual New York State Suffrage Convention later that year. This convention ignited a vibrant period of suffrage activism in Geneva, establishing it as a focal point for many prominent activists and speakers. The Women's Suffrage Convention was held November 3rd at Collins Music Hall on Main Street and November 4th and 5th at the Smith. According to an article published in the Geneva Gazette, November 5, 1897, the Smith was specially decorated with yellow draping hanging off the dress circle and various banners and flags. Among the speakers at this event was Susan B. Anthony. Although Anthony gave her main address at Collins Music Hall on the evening of the 3rd, she also spoke at the Smith as part of a response to committee reports and messages delivered from other organizations. The convention welcomed delegates from all over New York State, and Genevans hosted them in their homes for the duration. Among those representing their communities was Harriet Tubman, who was by then living in Auburn, New York. In the article that lists all of the delegates and their hosts, every single name is preceded by Mrs., Miss, or Doctor, with the exception of Tubman. While the races of all the other women listed are not known, it is a strong likelihood that they were all white women. The lack of honorific preceding Tubman's name may illustrate the implicit, and often explicit, racism inherent to the U.S. suffrage campaign. Whether this slight was intentional or part of deeply internalized racism on the part of the newspaper writer is unclear. What is clear, however, is that some of the speakers were less than considerate of the racialized implications of their language choices. One of the final speakers that evening, before Reverend Shaw took the stage, was Dr. Whitman Jordan of the Experiment Station. Included in his remarks was this statement: "Very little is made in telling woman she is a slave. Think of all the happy homes all over this land, where the only true slavery is the slavery of love." And all of this was said while freedom fighter, veteran, and former enslaved woman Mrs. Harriet Tubman was sitting in the audience. As the U.S. celebrates the centennial of the 19th Amendment, we must not overlook the ugly reality that not all women were granted equal access to the voting booth 100 years ago. Voting rights remained stripped from Indigenous men and women and many Asian immigrants, and restricted for African American women through exclusive racist legislation for many decades. Even today, enfranchisement is imperiled for many. For more information on the history of the Smith Opera House, please visit our history blog, which can be found on our website, thesmith.org. You can also learn how to become a member of the Smith and how to make a donation. We'll see you next time for another ghost-like glimpse of the history of the Smith.